The planet Dravenus 7 was quiet under its twin moons, the barren landscape bathed in pale silver light. Daniel stood on the observation deck of his small research station, sipping lukewarm coffee and staring out into the distance. The station was his solitude, a place where he could work without the distractions of crowded colonies. Tonight, however, something felt different. The sensors beeped softly, pulling his attention to the console. Unusual energy signature detected. The screen flashed. Frowning, Daniel grabbed his jacket and flashlight, stepping out into the cool night. The source of the anomaly was close, just beyond the ridge. As he approached, he saw faint, flickering lights, blue and green, dancing in the air like a broken aurora. In the center of the glow, a figure lay slumped on the rocky ground. Daniel's heart raced. He didn't expect this. It was a woman. No, not a woman, not entirely human. Her skin shimmered faintly under the moonlight, a silvery hue that seemed to shift like liquid metal. Her hair, dark and flowing, was tangled around her delicate face. Most striking were her eyes, half open and glowing faintly, like dying embers. She was clearly injured, her breaths shallow and labored. "Hey, are you all right?" Daniel's voice trembled as he crouched beside her. The woman flinched at his voice, her glowing eyes locking onto him. She tried to sit up, but pain shot through her body, and she collapsed again. "Stay away," she whispered, her voice barely audible but filled with a strange melodic quality. Daniel ignored her warning. "You're hurt," he said, pulling out a small medical scanner from his pocket. The device beeped erratically as it scanned her. It wasn't designed for alien biology, but even Daniel could tell she was in bad shape. "You don't understand," she murmured, her voice stronger now, but still weak. "They'll come. They'll find me. If you help me, you'll be in danger." Daniel hesitated. Whoever they were, they sounded dangerous. But could he really just leave her here? He wasn't that kind of person. "Look, I don't know who they are, but I can't leave you out here to die," he said firmly. "My station isn't far. I can help." Her glowing eyes searched his face, as if trying to understand his intentions. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why would you risk yourself for a stranger?" Daniel shrugged. "Because it's the right thing to do." The woman seemed to struggle with his words, as though the concept was foreign to her. After a moment, she gave a weak nod. "All right," she whispered. "But you'll regret this." Daniel slipped his arms under her, lifting her carefully. She was lighter than he expected, almost weightless, and her skin was cool to the touch. As he carried her back to the station, he couldn't shake the feeling that his quiet life was about to change forever. The stars above seemed to shimmer brighter, as if watching the first threads of fate begin to weave their story. Inside the research station, the soft hum of machinery filled the air. Daniel laid the alien woman on the medical table, his hands trembling slightly. He wasn't a doctor, but he knew enough to clean a wound and stabilize someone. She stirred, her glowing eyes scanning the room. "What is this place?" she asked weakly. "My station," Daniel replied, carefully checking a bruised area on her arm. "I'm just an engineer working here. Nothing fancy, but it's safe." She tried to sit up, wincing in pain. "You should have left me out there. You don't understand what you've done." Daniel frowned, pausing his work. "You keep saying that. What exactly have I done? Who are you, and why are you in danger?" The woman hesitated, as if deciding how much she could trust him. Finally, she sighed. "My name is Lyrian," she said, her voice still soft but gaining strength. "I am an Eltherai from the Torhian system. My people, they do not tolerate disobedience. I broke one of our most sacred laws, and now I am hunted." Daniel leaned back, processing her words. "Hunted for what? What did you do?" She turned her gaze to the ceiling, her expression distant. "I questioned our traditions. I believed there was more to life than what my people dictated. I sought freedom, individuality, emotions. My crime was wanting to feel, to live my own way." Daniel raised an eyebrow. That's it? You're being hunted because you wanted to live freely. Lyrian nodded. To the Eltherai, such thoughts are dangerous. If they find me, they will erase my mind, strip me of my identity. I will become nothing. For a moment, silence hung between them. Daniel could see the fear in her eyes, a deep, haunting fear of losing herself. He felt a pang of sympathy, but also a rising determination. Well, they're not getting you, he said firmly. Not while you're here. Lyrian's glowing eyes widened slightly. Why would you help me? You owe me nothing. Daniel shrugged, a small smile tugging at his lips. I don't need a reason to do the right thing. Besides, I can't just stand by while someone's in trouble. That's not who I am. She studied him for a moment, her gaze piercing yet uncertain. Humans are strange, she said softly. Daniel laughed. You're not wrong. Suddenly, the station's alarm system blared, jolting them both. Unidentified ship approaching. The automated voice announced. Daniel's stomach dropped. Lyrian's face darkened. They found me. Daniel's mind raced. He wasn't a soldier, but he wasn't about to give her up. All right, Lyrian, he said, grabbing his tools and pulling up the station's security system. If they want to come here, they'll have to get through me first. She looked at him with a mixture of astonishment and gratitude. You don't know what you're up against. Maybe not, Daniel replied, his eyes narrowing. But I'm not giving up without a fight. The station's lights dimmed as the automated alarm continued its relentless blaring. Daniel's fingers flew over the console, activating the station's limited defensive systems. He wasn't sure how long they would hold, but he was determined to buy them some time. Lyrian sat up, her breathing uneven. You need to listen to me. If they're here, they will not stop until they capture me. Your defenses won't be enough. Daniel glanced at her, his expression grim. Then we'll have to outsmart them. Do they know you're inside the station? Lyrian shook her head. Not yet, but they'll scan the area. Eltherai ships are equipped with advanced sensors. They'll detect my energy signature. Energy signature, Daniel repeated, his mind racing. Wait, is that why the anomaly showed up on my sensors earlier? Yes, Lyrian admitted. My kind emit a unique psychic energy. It's how they track me. Daniel rubbed his chin, thinking. All right, if it's your energy they're after, maybe we can mask it or redirect it. Do you have any way to suppress it? Lyrian hesitated. I can dampen it temporarily, but it takes effort. I am weak right now. Do what you can, Daniel said. I'll handle the rest. As Lyrian closed her eyes, focusing on suppressing her energy signature, Daniel set to work. He connected the station's sensor grid to a makeshift emitter, redirecting its output to mimic random interference. It wasn't perfect, but it might confuse the Eltherai long enough to keep them at bay. The console beeped, showing an incoming ship landing near the ridge where Daniel had found Lyrian. His stomach tightened. They're here. Lyrian opened her eyes, her expression strained. You should leave me. They won't harm you if you give me up. Daniel turned to her, his jaw clenched. I'm not leaving you. I don't care who they are. You don't deserve whatever punishment they're planning for you. Before Lyrian could respond, a low rumble echoed through the ground. The Eltherai ship's sleek, dark silhouette appeared on the monitor, its glowing lights scanning the terrain. Daniel's makeshift interference seemed to hold for now, but the ship was getting closer. They'll figure it out soon, Lyrian warned. Eltherai technology is far beyond human capabilities. Then I guess I'll just have to improvise, Daniel said, grabbing a portable energy pack and a few tools. He handed Lyrian a communicator. Stay here. If something goes wrong, you'll need to run. Run where? She asked, her voice trembling. Daniel met her gaze, his determination unwavering. Anywhere but here. Just promise me you'll survive. Lyrian hesitated before nodding. You are. Reckless, human, but brave. Daniel grinned. I'll take that as a compliment. As he stepped outside into the cold night, the wind howled around him. The HFY ship loomed larger, its searchlights sweeping the area. Daniel's heart pounded, but he steeled himself. If they wanted Lyrian, they'd have to go through him first. Daniel crouched behind a set of crates, his eyes locked on the HFY ship. The hum of its engines vibrated through the ground, growing louder with each passing second. He had done everything he could to keep the station's location hidden, at least for a little while. But the ship wasn't stopping. It was just a matter of time before they discovered him. He checked the small comm device in his pocket. It was silent. Lyrian hadn't tried to contact him yet, which meant she was still hiding inside the station. Daniel took a deep breath and glanced at the ship again, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on him. His mind raced, thinking of a dozen ways to get out of this. None of them were good. The HFY had advanced technology, and even with his makeshift interference, they could still track him down eventually. He had to act fast. Suddenly, a soft voice crackled through his comm device. "Daniel," Lyrian said, her voice strained but clear. "They're coming. You need to leave." Daniel stood up, his heart hammering. "I'm not leaving you," he said, his voice firm. "I won't leave you to them." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and when Lyrian spoke again, her voice was quieter, more resigned. "You don't understand. You're only making it worse. They will come for you too. You have no idea what they will do." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I don't care what they do. I'm not abandoning you. I promised I wouldn't." For a long moment, Lyrian was silent. Then she sighed, the sound barely audible. "You're stubborn, human," she muttered. "You remind me of something I thought I'd forgotten." Daniel furrowed his brow. "What do you mean?" Lyrian's voice softened. "In my world, emotions are seen as weaknesses. We are taught to suppress everything. Our fears, our desires, our dreams. To be strong, cold, and detached." Her voice faltered for a moment. "But I saw something in you. Something human. Something real." Daniel swallowed hard. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I saw love in your eyes when you said you wouldn't leave me," Lyrian continued. "I've never seen love like that. Not from my people. Not from anyone." The words hit Daniel harder than he expected. He felt a knot tighten in his chest. "Lyrian, I was taught to fear that kind of love," Lyrian interrupted, "to think it was dangerous. But now, I don't think I can go back to living without it." Daniel's heart skipped a beat. He couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. You love me." Lyrian was quiet for a long time, and when she finally spoke, her voice trembled. "I think I do. But it doesn't matter now. I've already lost everything. My people won't ever accept me, and even if I survive this, I'll always be hunted." Daniel's breath caught in his throat. He looked up at the ship, its lights flickering as it landed just outside the station. "Lyrian," he said urgently, "we're running out of time." "I know," she replied softly. "I'm just sorry. For everything." But Daniel's determination only grew stronger. "No more apologies," he said firmly. "We're not done yet." He grabbed the nearest weapon he could find, an old pulse gun, and made his way to the entrance of the station. It was time to fight back. The air inside the station was tense as Daniel stepped toward the entrance, his pulse racing. The low hum of the approaching HFY ship vibrated through the floor beneath him. It was almost here. Time was running out. Lyrian was still inside, her energy carefully suppressed, but Daniel knew it wouldn't be long before they discovered her presence. Her psychic signature was too unique to remain hidden forever. He had to act fast. He checked the pulse gun in his hand, hoping it would be enough to fend off the HFY soldiers. It wasn't much, but it was all he had. He tried to steady his breath, focusing on the task at hand. He couldn't let fear control him. Not now. Lyrian's voice came through the comm device, barely a whisper. "They're here, Daniel. Be careful." "I will be," Daniel replied, his voice firm but with a hint of tension. "Stay hidden. Don't come out unless I tell you." There was a brief silence before Lyrian spoke again. "You're doing the right thing," she said, her tone soft. "I'm sorry for dragging you into this. You should never have been involved." Daniel shook his head, even though she couldn't see him. "I'm not backing down, Lyrian. You mean more to me than anything else. I won't let them take you." The door to the station creaked open, and Daniel stepped into the cold night air. The HFY ship had landed just a few hundred feet away. Its dark, sleek shape loomed like a predator waiting to strike. As the ship's hatch opened, several figures emerged. They were tall and imposing, their metallic armor glinting under the dim light. Their eyes glowed with an unsettling, almost unnatural intensity. The HFY soldiers. Daniel raised the pulse gun, taking aim at the first soldier who appeared. His finger hovered over the trigger, but his heart hammered in his chest. The soldiers didn't seem to notice him yet, distracted by their scanning equipment. Then one of them, the leader Daniel assumed, looked in his direction. The soldier's cold, calculating eyes met Daniel's. It was as if the alien could see right through him. "Human," the leader's voice boomed, amplified by a translator. "You are harboring one of our fugitives. Step aside, and we will allow you to leave unharmed." Daniel didn't move. "I'm not letting you take her," he said, his voice steady despite the fear swirling inside him. "If you want her, you'll have to get through me first." The leader's eyes narrowed, and for a moment there was silence. Then the soldier raised a hand, signaling his team to advance. The others moved quickly, their movements precise and disciplined. They didn't seem to care about Daniel's warning. Without thinking, Daniel fired the pulse gun. The blast hit one of the soldiers square in the chest, sending him flying backward. The others stopped, momentarily stunned. Lyrian's voice echoed in Daniel's ear. "You need to run. They will not be stopped by a single attack." "I'm not going anywhere," Daniel replied through gritted teeth. The HFY soldiers didn't hesitate. They quickly raised their own weapons, and Daniel dove for cover behind a stack of crates. The air was filled with the sharp crack of energy blasts. One of them grazed his shoulder, sending a jolt of pain through his body. Daniel's heart raced as he returned fire, trying to hold them off long enough for Lyrian to escape. But the soldiers were relentless, their aim deadly accurate. The station was no longer a safe haven. It was becoming a battleground. As the fight raged on, Daniel realized that this was only the beginning. The HFY weren't going to stop until they had her, but as long as he was breathing, he would fight. The sound of energy blasts echoed through the air as Daniel ducked behind a pile of crates, his pulse racing. His shoulder throbbed from the earlier hit, but he didn't have time to worry about it. He couldn't afford to lose focus now. The HFY soldiers were closing in, their weapons trained on his position. Daniel knew he couldn't hold out much longer. He had already used most of his ammunition, and the soldiers seemed to have an endless supply. The odds were stacking up against him, but he wasn't about to give up. Through the chaos of gunfire, Daniel heard Lyrian's voice crackle in his earpiece. "Daniel, you need to stop this. They will keep coming until they get me." "Not happening," Daniel gritted his teeth. He peeked out from behind the crates, firing another shot that knocked one of the soldiers back. "I'm not letting them take you." Lyrian's voice softened, though there was still a hint of urgency. "You don't understand. This isn't just about me. It's about everything I've ever known, everything I've been forced to leave behind. My people will not let me go. Even if you stop these soldiers, there will be more." Daniel's heart tightened at her words, but he didn't back down. "I don't care what it costs. I won't let you face this alone." Lyrian's voice grew more distant, as if she were gathering her thoughts. "The truth is, I'm not just running from my people. I'm running from everything I was taught to believe. The HFY, we are taught that emotions are weaknesses, that we must never show love, never form attachments. We are meant to be cold, calculated, and obedient." Daniel frowned. "You said you wanted freedom, right? This is your chance to break free from all of that. You don't have to go back." Lyrian was silent for a moment, and then she spoke again, her voice tinged with sadness. "I've lived my whole life as part of a system that suppresses who I am. It's all I've known. I don't know what I would be without it. But now, after meeting you, after seeing what humans can feel, what you're willing to risk for someone else, I realize I don't want to go back to that cold existence." Daniel's heart thudded in his chest. He wasn't sure what to say, but he knew that Lyrian was right. This wasn't just about her safety anymore. It was about her choosing a different life, a life where she didn't have to hide who she was, a life where she could experience love, freedom, and emotions, the things she had been denied by her own kind. Before he could respond, Lyrian spoke again. "Daniel, I'm sorry. I should have told you sooner. I didn't want to bring you into this, but now, I can't go back. I don't want to." His grip tightened on the pulse gun. "You don't have to go back. Not while I'm here. We'll figure this out together. I promise." Lyrian's voice trembled slightly. "You're risking everything for me. But you should know, there's more at stake than just me. The Elthari will stop at nothing to control me. And if they can't have me, they'll erase everything about me, my memories, my identity. They will make me forget who I am." Daniel's heart clenched at her words. He couldn't even begin to imagine what that must feel like. "I won't let that happen to you. I won't let them erase who you are." Lyrian's voice was steady now. "Then we must fight. If you truly care, we fight, together." He nodded, feeling the surge of determination. There was no going back now. They were in this together, and he would do whatever it took to help her. The battle was far from over, but with Lyrian's words fueling his resolve, Daniel knew one thing for sure. They weren't going down without a fight. Daniel's breath came in sharp gasps as he crouched behind the crates, trying to stay hidden from the Elthari soldiers advancing toward him. His pulse gun was nearly empty, and the soldiers were getting closer, their footsteps echoing ominously in the cold night air. He knew he couldn't keep this up for much longer. The station was almost out of power, and the makeshift defense systems he'd rigged earlier were beginning to fail. The Elthari soldiers had already breached the outer perimeter. There was no way to outrun them. His only hope now was to hold them off long enough for Lyrian to escape. But where would she go? She didn't know the planet, didn't know the terrain. And even if she ran, the soldiers would catch her sooner or later. The thought made Daniel's heart ache. He didn't even know why he was doing this, fighting to protect her, putting his life on the line for someone he barely knew. But when he thought about her, her soft voice, her strength, her courage, it made sense. She had shown him what it meant to care, to fight for something bigger than yourself. For that, he would risk everything. Suddenly, a voice crackled through his comm device. It was Lyrian. "Daniel," she said, her voice urgent. "They're too many. You need to leave before they—" "I'm not leaving you," Daniel interrupted, his voice steady despite the chaos. "We're getting out of this together." There was a brief pause, and then Lyrian spoke again, her voice softer this time. "I don't want you to die because of me." Daniel's heart tightened. He wanted to tell her that everything would be fine, that they'd get through this, but deep down, he wasn't sure. The odds were stacked against them, but he couldn't let her think he was giving up. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, his voice firm. "You don't get to make that decision for me. We're in this together, no matter what." The sound of approaching footsteps grew louder. The Elthari soldiers were nearly upon him. He couldn't wait any longer. He glanced around, searching for something, anything, that could give him an advantage. His eyes landed on a nearby control panel. It was part of the station's backup system. A plan began to form in his mind, but it was risky. If he could overload the system, it might trigger a blast powerful enough to knock out the soldiers, at least long enough for them to escape. It was a desperate move, but it was the only chance they had left. "Lyrian," Daniel said, his voice urgent. "I need you to trust me. Get to the control room. I'm going to overload the backup system. Lyrian didn't hesitate. I'm on my way, she replied. Daniel moved quickly, darting from cover to cover, making his way toward the control panel. The soldiers were closing in, and his heart pounded in his chest. He reached the panel, fingers trembling as he typed in the override code. The lights flickered, and the countdown began. The soldiers were almost on him now. Daniel turned, his back to the control panel, pulse gun raised. He fired a few shots, hoping to slow them down, but he knew it wouldn't be enough. This was it. Lyrian, now, he shouted into the comm. The blast was deafening. For a moment, everything went dark. When the smoke cleared, the HFY soldiers were stunned, disoriented, and momentarily incapacitated. Let's go, Daniel shouted, grabbing Lyrian's hand as she reached him. Together, they ran into the night, the stars above them a reminder that they still had a chance. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, they had hope. The cold wind whipped through the barren landscape of Dravenus 7 as Daniel and Lyrian ran, their footsteps hurried but steady. The HFY soldiers were disoriented by the blast, but they wouldn't stay down for long. Daniel knew they had only moments before the soldiers regained their senses and began chasing them again. They had to keep moving. Lyrian's breath came in short bursts beside him, her energy still weak from the suppression earlier. Daniel could see her struggling to keep up, but she didn't say a word. She was determined, just like him. They both knew that there was no going back now. They reached a small ravine, a natural shelter hidden by rocky outcrops. It wasn't much, but it would have to do for the moment. They crouched behind one of the rocks, trying to catch their breath and figure out their next move. Lyrian leaned against the stone, her eyes closed for a moment. That was too close, she whispered. Daniel nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. I know, but we're still alive, and that's what matters right now. Lyrian opened her eyes and looked at him, a small smile forming on her lips. You're different from everyone I've known. You don't fear me. You don't fear my people. Daniel shrugged. I've had my share of fears, but fear doesn't change anything. We fight or we lose. She studied him for a moment, as if trying to understand what made him tick. You've risked everything for me, Daniel. A human, fighting to protect an alien. You don't know what it means to my people. I don't care about your people, Daniel said, his voice steady. I care about you, and that's enough for me. Lyrian's eyes softened, her expression filled with a mixture of surprise and something deeper, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel before. I thought I would always be alone, she said softly. I thought I'd always be hunted, a fugitive with no place to belong. But now I feel something different. Daniel reached out and gently took her hand. You're not alone anymore. Not with me. For a long moment, they just sat there, the weight of their words hanging between them. The world outside seemed distant, and in that quiet moment, Daniel felt a deep sense of connection to Lyrian, something stronger than just survival. It was a bond forged through trust, sacrifice, and love. The sound of distant engines broke the silence, and Lyrian immediately tensed. Daniel looked at her, ready to spring into action, but she shook her head. We don't have much time, she said, her voice sharp. They're coming again, but we can't outrun them forever. Daniel frowned, thinking quickly. We'll need a plan. We can't keep running. We have to fight back, but on our terms. Lyrian's eyes burned with resolve. I don't know what you have in mind, but I'm with you. Daniel nodded. We'll head to the old ruins to the west. It's a good hiding spot, and I can rig some traps. If we can slow them down long enough, we might have a chance. Lyrian's eyes softened with gratitude. You really will do anything for me, won't you? Anything, Daniel said firmly. As long as you need me. Together, they stood, ready to face whatever came next. The world was still full of danger, and their enemies hadn't given up. But Daniel knew one thing for sure. Whatever the future held, they would face it together. They had found something rare, something worth fighting for, and no matter what happened, they would never let go of each other. Daniel and Lyrian moved quickly through the rocky landscape, their steps light but determined. The HFY soldiers were not far behind, their advanced technology and relentless pursuit making them a formidable force. The old ruins were their only hope, a place where they could make a stand. The wind howled around them as they reached the entrance to the ruins, a crumbling structure hidden among the jagged rocks. Daniel scanned the area, his mind racing. They needed to set up traps, something to slow the soldiers down long enough for them to escape, or at least buy enough time for a final push. Lyrian's energy was still low, but there was a fire in her eyes. "We don't have much time. We'll need to work quickly." "I know," Daniel replied, already moving toward a pile of loose rocks. "Help me gather anything we can use. We'll make this place work to our advantage." The ruins were ancient, a relic of a long-forgotten civilization. The walls were cracked, and the ground was littered with broken stone, but it offered them the cover they needed. As Daniel and Lyrian gathered supplies, Daniel's mind raced through every possibility. He had to make every move count. They couldn't afford to fail now. As they worked, the distant hum of the HFY ship grew louder. The soldiers were close, too close. Daniel knew they had to finish setting up the traps before they arrived. They couldn't let the enemy get the upper hand. Lyrian moved silently beside him, her sharp eyes scanning the surroundings. "If they come from the east, they'll see us before we can react," she said, her voice low but steady. "We need to use the terrain to our advantage." Daniel nodded. "Right. We'll set up the explosives by the eastern entrance. We'll trigger them when they're close enough. The shockwave should knock them off balance long enough to give us a chance." Lyrian's gaze softened for a moment as she looked at him. "You're willing to risk everything for me. You've already done so much." Daniel's expression was focused, but there was a flicker of warmth in his eyes. "I told you, I'm not leaving you. Not now, not ever." Lyrian nodded, her face set in a determined expression. "Then let's make it count." The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted their moment. The HFY soldiers were almost upon them. Daniel quickly finished setting the final traps, making sure everything was in place. The stakes were high. If they didn't succeed, there would be no second chance. Daniel motioned for Lyrian to move into position. They both crouched behind a large rock, waiting. The HFY soldiers were close now, their silhouettes just visible against the darkening sky. Daniel could hear their boots crunching against the gravel, their weapons raised and ready. A voice shouted in the distance, "We know you're here, fugitives. Come out and surrender." Daniel's heart pounded, but he kept his voice steady. "I'm not surrendering. Not to you, not to anyone." Lyrian's hand found his, and for a moment, they both stood there, silently bracing themselves for what was about to come. As the soldiers drew closer, Daniel took a deep breath. He was ready. "Now," he whispered. He triggered the explosives. The ground shook, and a powerful blast erupted from the eastern entrance. The soldiers were thrown off balance, their formations collapsing in the chaos. It was now or never. With no time to waste, Daniel and Lyrian sprinted forward, their path cleared by the blast. The soldiers were disoriented, but they quickly regained their footing, moving to block the escape route. Daniel's heart raced, but he refused to stop. This was their final chance. They had no choice but to keep pushing forward, to fight for their freedom. And they would not stop until they had it. The air was thick with smoke and dust as Daniel and Lyrian ran through the ruins, their hearts pounding in their chests. The explosion had given them a brief window of opportunity, but the HFY soldiers were recovering faster than expected. The sound of their boots pounding against the ground grew louder, but Daniel refused to look back. He couldn't afford to. Ahead of them, the entrance to a narrow canyon loomed. It was their best chance. If they could make it through the canyon, they could reach the hidden cave system on the other side. A place that the HFY didn't know about, a place where they could regroup and plan their next move. Lyrian's breathing was heavy, and Daniel could feel her slowing down. She had already given everything she had, and he knew she was pushing herself beyond her limits. But they couldn't stop now. Not when they were so close to safety. "Lyrian," Daniel said, his voice urgent but calm. "We're almost there. Just a little further." She nodded, her face set with determination. "I'm with you," she replied through gritted teeth, though her voice betrayed her exhaustion. The Elthari soldiers were closer now, their voices carrying through the air as they shouted orders. Daniel could hear the fear in their voices as they realized their quarry wasn't going to make it easy for them. Just as Daniel thought they might be cornered, Lyrian's hand found his. "Go," she urged, pulling him toward the canyon. With one final burst of energy, they pushed through the entrance to the canyon, disappearing into the shadows. The walls of the canyon towered above them, blocking the view of the Elthari ship. The only sound was the crunch of gravel beneath their feet. They kept moving, knowing that they couldn't afford to stop until they reached the cave system. But as they moved deeper into the canyon, the sound of the soldiers faded, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Daniel allowed himself to breathe. They finally reached the entrance to the cave, a small opening barely visible in the shadows. Daniel glanced at Lyrian, her face pale from exhaustion, but her eyes held something stronger, resolve. She had fought beside him, trusted him, and together they had made it this far. He helped her inside, and they took a moment to catch their breath in the cool darkness of the cave. The entrance was hidden well enough that the Elthari would have a difficult time finding it, at least for now. "Are we safe?" Lyrian asked, her voice low, almost as if she didn't want to believe it. Daniel nodded, sitting beside her against the cold stone. "For now, yes. We've bought ourselves some time." Lyrian leaned her head against the rock, closing her eyes. "I didn't think we'd make it this far," she confessed. "I thought they'd find me, erase me, make me forget everything." Daniel reached out and gently took her hand. "You're not going anywhere, Lyrian. Not while I'm here." She looked up at him, her eyes softening. "I never believed in love like this. I never thought someone would fight for me, risk everything for me." Daniel smiled, a sense of peace settling over him for the first time in days. "I promised you, didn't I? I'd do anything to protect you." Lyrian's smile was faint, but it was enough. "You've already given me more than I ever expected." They sat in silence for a while, the weight of everything they had been through hanging in the air. But for the first time, it didn't feel so heavy. They had survived, and together they had a chance at something new. When Daniel finally spoke, his voice was firm. "This is just the beginning, Lyrian. We're going to build a real life, free from fear and control." Lyrian squeezed his hand, her face lighting up with a quiet hope. Together. Daniel's smile was the only answer she needed. Together. The word felt like a promise, one that would carry them through whatever came next. They had fought for each other, and now they would fight for their future.